On this episode of Real American Hero, George Hausold of the U.S. Army Air Force recalls his incredible story as a bombardier during the great bombing campaigns of World War II.
I'm not sure what happened, but the thing is, all of a sudden our plane dropped and we were sitting in the open and the fighter jumped us.
His survival through the harsh German prison camps.
And this was a camp that was designed for 30,000 POWs. When we got there were over 130,000. So you can picture what the living conditions were.
And witnessing firsthand the final days of the war.
Every house would have a white sheet hanging from a window somewhere. That was it. Fini.
Today on Real American Hero. December 7th, 1941, the Japanese Imperial Navy descends upon the American Navy base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and cripples the fleet, leaving over 2,000 men dead and 1,000 wounded. The Japanese attack single-handedly brings the United States of America into the forefront of World War II. Lieutenant of the United States Army Air Force, George Hausold, remembers the day vividly.
Well, when Pearl Harbor came along, this was on a Sunday, and I remember I was on my way to pick up my girlfriend at her girlfriend's house, and I heard it on a car radio. Pearl Harbor was sort of a shock because there wasn't really that much attention at that time to the Pacific. When you first heard about it, you really didn't realize the damage that was done. I mean, it took out practically the whole fleet.
20-year-old Hausold was working in New York City for the BG Corporation, a company which manufactured spark plugs for British tanks to support the war effort in Europe. After the brutal attack on Pearl Harbor, George knew that an upcoming draft would be inevitable. At 20 years old, he made the calculating effort to enlist in hope he could defend his country on his terms and perhaps use this opportunity to pursue his lifelong passion of learning how to fly.
About 6 months passed, and I figured I've got to get in the service. I was working for the war effort anyway, as far as Britain went, and we became involved in it. So I figured I can do better than that, and I wanted to fly anyway. I figured I was to get in the service and become a hotshot pilot, be an ace and everything else. And I figured if they drafted me, they could put me anywhere. So this was sort of an incentive to, maybe if I get in now, I figured eventually I'm going to go in anyway, one way or the other. And I figured if I enlist, I can maybe get something that I want and still do what I want to do and come out alive.
After completing boot camp in Fort Dix, New Jersey, George was introduced to the grueling training regiment during his cadet program in Shepherd Field, Texas.
So we were down there in the middle of the summer, and it was hot, marching, and then we get back to the barracks, and we have to clean up, and then we have to come out for retreat. Now we're back out on the field again in full uniform, and you're standing there at attention, and the sun is still up, and it's still hot, and some of the guys would pass out. If they passed out, you were out of the program, period. So we figured, this could happen to me. So what would happen? We find these guys that begin to weave a little bit in line, and they're right next to you. You just reach over and sort of hold them up. Make sure he got through.
From Texas, George was transported to Santa Ana, California, where he qualified for pilot, bombardier, and navigation training. But just when George was taking the first steps to pursue his dream of becoming a flying ace, fate would have different plans.
I didn't get through pilot training. I washed out on pilot training, which I'm not really ashamed of it, but I wasn't really bitter. So I figured, well, okay, I had a choice now of navigation training or bombardier training, so I took bombardier training.
Undeterred by the disappointing outcome of his pilot training, George was determined to fight the war in the air with his comrades, even if in a different capacity.
I figured the idea, if I'm going to be flying, I'm going to be facing the enemy, maybe 5 miles away, but, straight up. But at least I could contribute, at least by, doing something.
George and his team spent the next several months acquiring the taste for the special skill of bombardier training.
This plane had in the back of the plane had a door in the floor. Actually, it was a panel came out, and when one bombardier was up on a bomb site, dropping bombs, the other bombardier had to be in the back, laying on his belly with a hand camera, taking pictures of the hits. And they were very, very accurate. I mean, you could, if the conditions were right, you could drop a bomb. They used to say you could drop a bomb from 20,000 feet into a pickleball. The plane is under the control of the bomb site on a bomb run. The pilot hands off. He's sitting there. He's like, he's figuring, naturally a pilot's going to be nervous because he can't do anything. He can take it back at any time. But then it would destroy the bomb run until the bombs. And as soon as I say bombs away, okay to turn, then he's got it back. That means get the hell away from the target. From there, I went to Tucson, where I met my crew. A crew formed up in Tucson, and this is where I became familiar with the B-24.
The B-24 bomber aircraft was instrumental on many successful bombing campaigns during World War II. Utilized by every branch of the American Armed Forces, the B-24 was the bomber of choice due to its long range and its ability to sustain a heavy bomb load. While waiting for the air training field to be built in Italy, George's crew made a stop in Tunisia for 2 months. Desperate to find some sort of transportation and explore the area, George's team made a unique acquisition.
While looking around for some kind of a vehicle, we discovered this parts for the VW. We got all the parts together, got them in a GI truck, and everything except the gas tank. Put it together, and eventually you might say, made a moonlight requisition. It wasn't exactly moonlight, but we sort of borrowed it from a British VW when they weren't looking. So, of course, then we had to have a way to mount it, so we had the shop on the base take the end of a bomb crate and mold it so it fit over the front axles, and it curved it so it would fit the gas tank, and we strapped it down, and we had a gas tank. And of course, we had no muffler on it, we had no starter on it, no exhaust pipe on it, and it just go blah, 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 until you step on the gas. Well, that was our transportation. That was a piece of work, that thing. We were on a mission to Blackhammer, Germany. Well, we didn't get to it, and we were sitting in the open, and the fighters jumped us.
In the beginning of May 1944, George and his crew started flying their first combat missions. After a couple of routine assignments, George's rigorous training would be put to the test as he headed directly into enemy lines.
We're flying a mission to over probably the toughest target in Europe. Now, believe it, a lot of people don't realize that, but it was Vienna. The Vienna industrial complex. Vienna had more flak guns than any other city in Europe, and when they knew when we were coming. And of course, the spy network was great. They knew exactly who we were and where we were going. So when we got on a bomb run in Vienna, I remember that you could actually see the black cloud in front of you over the target. That was the German flak smoke was black. Then I spotted a red flare come up through the top of the cloud. I figured, I wonder what that's for. Yeah, we're flying along, coming along, and then all of a sudden there's a green flake. Green one goes up through there. Well, I found out later that when the Germans were firing rapid fire with the German 88s, 88 millimeter, they were great guns. They were the best weapon the Germans had, because it was an 88 millimeter gun which could traverse down to level and to a complete 90 degrees. That's the only gun that could do that. And they mounted these on flat cars, railroad cars. They could move them anywhere they wanted, where there was a railroad. But what happened, they would fire them so fast, they'd get so hot, they had to take time to cool the guns down. And when they did that, they fired a green flare up there when they stopped firing. And that green flare was a signal to the German fighters to come in now and jump on the bombers. And the German fighter pilots, they were watching. If they see the red flare, that means get out of there. That was for them. Well, we found out just how bad it was, because my pilot got hit on a bomb run. And a navigator got hit, I think with the same piece of flak. So it was up to me. So I grabbed the first aid kit, came up through the tunnel with a portable oxygen bottle on, because we were about 24,000 feet. And I cut the pilot's pants leg open. He got hit right through the calf, right through here, big little hole here. He must have been, that was a strange hit, because he came in this way, missed this leg, came in this leg, and came out this leg with makes a big hole coming out. So I opened the first aid kit, and I took a compress out, and when I took the compress out, a piece of flak fell out of it. I didn't realize that there was a hole in the bottom of the case where a piece of flak had come in, lodged in the first aid kit. But I get two big compresses in here anyway, so I took the second one and first I spread the sulfur on us and wrapped them up tight. And the navigator, he had a piece taken out of his shin bone, so I had to bandage him up. But he wasn't too bad. But we got back okay.
But it was on a cloudy, fateful day that George will never forget.
We were on a mission to Blackhammer, Germany, and oil storage tanks, I think, oil storage or oil. Well, we didn't get to it. We were going through the clouds, and when we go through clouds, the planes usually separate a little bit so they don't collide with one another. I'm not sure what happened, but the thing is, all of a sudden our plane dropped, and we were sitting in the open, and the fighters jumped us. The German fighters made a pass from the back. It took out one of the rudders. One of the rudders was gone. I could see that. And I didn't realize it, but they also hit the ball turret gunner. Killed it, just about decapitated him. So there was either the same plane or another one was underneath and took out the ball turret. And making the second pass, I got up and I could see up in the compartment in the front, navigator's compartment, bombardier compartment, there's a little dome. It's called an astrodome. And I can put my head up in there and I get good visibility all around. So I'm up there and I'm calling off the fighters. I got down, I followed the fighter down. And while I'm up there, there was a German fighter behind us. And he was firing, and they fired 20 millimeter shells. They looked like red cannonballs coming right off my head, going beyond me. And we must have been pretty close to catching up to the rest of our group, because I saw 50 caliber tracers coming this way over the top, trying to get to the fighter. But about that time, I didn't realize it up in the front, but we had a fire in a bomb bay. You get a fire in a bomb bay, you're talking about gasoline, you're talking about hydraulic fluid, you're talking about you got oxygen tubes run through there. So they're almost impossible to put out. But my navigator, he tried to put the flames out. He was so badly burned that his eyelashes, his eyebrows, and his eyelids, they were charred. I know he couldn't see, and he was in deep shock because he was shaking like a leaf. As I'm calling out the fighters, I get up, look back at the Astrodome. From the Astrodome back into the pilot, I keep looking right at the pilot. There weren't any, they were gone. So that means to me the communication system was out. I couldn't hear anything. So I notified the nose turret gunner, we better get the hell out of there. And so I went out the nose wheel door, tumbled right out lean back into the nose wheel door, and you hit a lever, and you go out backwards. I'm glad I remembered I had my chute on. Well, there I was hanging from the parachute. Just as my chute popped open, the plane blew up. So that was pretty close. So I'm coming down, and it's starts swinging. I'm looking around, and I see the farmers are gathering. You know, they come in a circle. They're waiting for you to come down. You're not going to go anywhere because they got you. In the field, middle of a field. And they were irate because what happens now, as soon as we're over enemy territory, it's my job to go out and pull the pins on the bombs that makes them live. They're armed. So when you dump a whole load of bombs, which I had to do because we were in trouble, we dumped the bombs. We don't know where it's going, and they're armed and they're going to explode. So apparently it's happened to these people before. This is the time of the year when they were trying to, get their crops in. The crops were just coming in nicely, wheat and barley and oats and stuff. A load of bombs that go off, they're going to start a fire. Or it could be over a town, knock out innocent people. So they were a little PO'd. But as soon as I hit the ground, they were on me. They kind of beat the hell out of me, but it's a little scary because some of them had scythes and pitchforks and stuff like that,
Coming up next, George is taken into custody and forced to spend the next year of his life surviving in various German prison camps. Army Air Force Lieutenant George Hausold's bombardier fleet is suddenly attacked while on a mission over Hungary. With his turret gunner dead, co-pilot extremely burned, George evacuates the rest of his team as they descend into an angry Hungarian mob. The pilot was taken to the local hospital, while George and his engineer were transferred to Budapest for interrogation.
And my interrogator knew exactly who I was. He went to school in Jersey City. I went to school in Union City. They were rival high school football teams. So, what can I tell him? You give him name, rank, and serial number. And he told me what group I was in, what squadron I was in. So there was no big deal there. I couldn't tell him anything anyway. From there, we did pretty well. We didn't lose too many people. We had a few people went off the nut, racing back and forth, taking their clothes off at 0 degrees. So we eventually got to a place called Spremberg, where it was an army base, and we stayed on that base. I'm not sure it was a base, but it was I know we were in a big building. It must like an armory, and we all slept on the floor. And the next day we got on the 40 and 8s, the famous European 40 and 8s from the World War I. This is 40. They were made for 40 men, 40 troops, or 8 horses. Well, we had 50 to 60 men on it. From there, it took us a few days to get down to Nuremberg. And when we slept on those trains, they had straw on the floor, which really didn't do much, except it helped if you, we were trapped. You couldn't go to the bathroom or anything. You had to do anything in there, and there was no place to go. I remember once we stopped in a railroad siding for some reason, and I don't know, maybe change engines or something, but they let us get out of the car one at a time, or 2 at a time, and if you had to do something, you could do it right there, on the tracks. Of course, that's your pride went right down the tubes when you're watching the townspeople watching you take a crap, and or anything. But hey, it's the way it was. So we got into Nuremberg, and we were there for a couple of months. And Nuremberg was actually the camp at Nuremberg. That was Stalag 13D, and that overlooked the city of Nuremberg. And they would have air raids almost every day, and we could watch them. And the Americans would come over in the daytime, and the British would come over at night. And they had flat cars all around the camp, because we were that close to the city. And when they were firing, as you could hear, if they pretty much straight up, the shrapnel would come down, and you could hear it made all kinds of weird sounds, whistle, scream, and because it'd be spinning. So the Germans let us dig slit trenches to get in the trenches in the compound. But of course, they didn't give us any shovels. We had to do it with tin cans.
George was then evacuated from Nuremberg to Stalag 7A in Moosburg.
And this was a camp that was designed for, I think, 30,000 POWs. Well, when we got there were over 130,000. So you can picture what the living conditions were.
Amongst the bleakness of the situation, George and his fellow prisoners made a priority of keeping up morale. With the holiday season approaching, spirits were high enough to celebrate an all-American Thanksgiving dinner.
We saved a couple of months to build up to the dinner. I mean, we didn't get that much to eat to begin with, but we saved a little bit. And it was great. When I think about it, it's probably one of the best Thanksgivings I've had. You know, we didn't have our own family there, but we were sort of a family anyway. You know, like a band of idiots in a prison camp. I mean, but everybody was in the same boat.
George would spend the next several months in the prison camp at Moosburg. Then, on April 29, 1945, they were liberated by none other than General Patton's 14th Armored Division.
He didn't come in the first day, but he was there the second day, riding on a tank, naturally. And when we went into Moosburg, along the side of the roads, there were ditches. This was now in April, the end of April 29th, well, probably at the beginning of May. And the ditches had water flowing, and you look down into it in these streams of water in the ditches, and you'd see all kinds of handguns, rifles, knives. They just discarded everything, the civilians. And the towns, as you get into the town, you'd see all the houses, at least every house would have a white sheet hanging from a window somewhere. That was it. Fini.
George stayed in the inactive reserve for 10 years and had a successful career working for the telephone company, but he will never forget how the experience of war has changed him.
Well, I think you might say I grew up. You know, I was 19. I was actually 20 when I enlisted. I just turned 20. I could see the things that could go wrong. I could see the things with, you know. I don't know. I think everybody who's been in the military, they come out, they spend enough time. I was in almost 3.5 years, most of it training. When you're in a position where you've got a job and you have it to do, and you can't back out. You can't say, you know, hey, this is what you signed up for. And you realize you're giving up your own personal freedom. So you sort of have to change. You have to realize this is what you're doing, and you sign up for it. It's a contract.
First Lieutenant George Hausold is a real American hero.